Our opening thought comes from Albert Einstein in response to the following question: what threats to academic freedom do you see at this time? Einstein's response: the threat to academic freedom in our time must be seen in the fact that, because of the alleged external danger to our country, freedom of teaching, mutual exchange of opinions, and freedom of press and other media of communication are encroached upon or obstructed. This is done by creating a situation in which people feel their economic positions endangered. Consequently, more and more people avoid expressing their opinion freely, even in their private social life. This is a state of affairs which a democratic government cannot survive in the long run. Our next reading comes from the joint statement of the American Association of University Professors chapters regarding the ongoing crisis at Columbia University. We write to condemn in the strongest possible terms two recent and related federal attacks on Columbia University: the impoundment of some $400 million in research funds and the targeting by Immigration and Customs Enforcement of Columbia students and alumni involved in pro-Palestine protests. In particular, the detention of Mahmoud Khalil, who is a lawful permanent resident of the United States. To search for adequate precedent for these brazenly illegal and partisan actions requires looking to the worst days of the Red Scare or the Alien and Sedition Acts. Nothing in the Constitution permits a president to target his political opponents by defying laws passed by Congress or by detaining and threatening to deport people for their viewpoints. Yet the illegality of these moves is almost beside the point. Their architects quite candidly describe them as part of a wider crusade against higher education, an attempt to impose top-down control on what Americans teach, study, and learn. Our next reading comes from Michael Roth, who is the president of Wesleyan University, from his writing, A Turning Point for University Leadership. Roth writes, university presidents must speak out against this attempt to control the political culture of our campuses, just as we should decry anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination. We should insist that students and faculty have the right to make their voices heard about the issues of the day. Neutrality here is a betrayal of our academic mission. The protection of academic freedom and the free pursuit of truth and knowledge, I think, are critical to fostering excellence in our colleges and universities, and also to fostering the critical and creative thinking that are key contributors to a vibrant, participatory democracy. The American pragmatist philosopher John Dewey, I don't know if he ever officially claimed to be Unitarian at the time, but he certainly was, as a religious humanist, a close friend of the Unitarian movement. He lived from 1859 to 1952, and Dewey was a staunch defender of academic freedom and recognized its importance for the integrity of higher education and also for freedom and for democracy in general. In fact, in 1915, John Dewey was one of the key founders of the American Association of University Professors. On campuses, we simply know it as AAUP. And this organization, since 1915, has worked to protect academic freedom and to protect academic tenure as a way of protecting academic freedom. Because if you were not tenured as a professor, your president or someone who was influential on the president could easily get you terminated before academic freedom and academic tenure were put into place. Dewey recognized that without academic freedom, the ideological whims of persons with money and power could easily threaten the independence and integrity of our institutions of higher learning. So we're all in higher education very thankful for the work of John Dewey and the AAUP. It's difficult to overestimate the importance of education for the well-being of a functioning and flourishing democratic society. Education is central. Education is one of the foundational elements of a just and participatory society. It's a key aspect of working towards the goal of equality of opportunity for all persons. We know from the evidence, and I've spoken about this here before, we know from the evidence that the happiest, the least corrupt, the best educated, the most healthy, the most free, the most sustainable, and the most flourishing societies all embrace and support pluralism of thought, pluralism in relation to speech and action. And the coordinated and sustained attack that we have witnessed on educators and on education in the United States is a direct threat to pluralism of thought, speech, and action. In other words, it's a direct threat to freedom and human flourishing. We know the goal of education is not simply acquiring knowledge. It's not simply acquiring information. It's not simply preparing for a job or preparing for employment. The goal of education, ideally, is the cultivation of wisdom, which is the synthesis of knowledge and virtue and justice for the flourishing of all persons. It's critical, I think, to keep this goal in mind, this goal of wisdom in mind, especially given the coordinated efforts that we're seeing to reduce all education to job preparation. Education is not only about preparing us for labor and work within our economy, it's also about preparing us for free and participatory action within our shared world. Higher education has always been under pressure from ideological forces within our society for as long as there has been higher education. But the current situation represents an existential threat to the integrity of higher education and its ability to be a force for good and progress within our democratic republic in its work to cultivate an informed and engaged citizenry for a vibrant and participatory democracy. The current fascist regime is making a direct assault on academic freedom and the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression of all forms at our colleges and universities. The regime is attempting to control the research and teaching agenda at these institutions by defunding them, by defunding institutions of higher education and withholding federal funds for their research, unless those institutions bow down to the regime's ideological demands. Not only that, the fascist regime is now revoking student visas and abducting, detaining, and deporting students from our colleges and universities who have expressed criticism of the government of Israel and its actions in Gaza. They're simply taking them sometimes off the street, putting them in cars, taking them to prison, and no one knows where they're going for a while, and then they end up deporting them out of the country for simply having different ideas. In one case, for simply writing against war and genocide in an op-ed in a college newspaper. Defending higher education from this barrage of attacks from American fascism does not mean that we simply ignore the ongoing problems and deficiencies in higher education. Higher education has problems even without this attack on it, and we have to be aware of those problems and open about those problems. We have serious issues with access and affordability in higher education in the United States. Student debt has gotten out of control, placing students in a situation of debt servitude for large portions of their lives. There are other ways of funding higher education than the way we do. We are also plagued by increasing corporate control of colleges and universities and decreased funding for publicly supported higher education. And in publicly supported higher education, there's a reason I say publicly supported and not public higher education, because the percentage of the operating budget of those institutions is so low that's provided by public funds that it's hardly the case that we should even call them public institutions anymore. But because of that, they have an increased reliance on student fees, on student tuition, private donors, and corporate money. And those private donors and that corporate money ends up having more and more control over those institutions, especially as members of those corporations and many of those private donors become members of the boards of trustees and make governing decisions about the work of those colleges and universities. But in spite of all those problems, and there are many, and they're ongoing, and we need to continue to work on them, but in spite of all those problems with higher education in the United States, students from all over the world have been attracted to U.S. American higher education because of its quality, because of the many opportunities for groundbreaking and innovative research, for its freedom of thought, expression, and action that they could experience while studying here. The current administration is diminishing everything that attracts international students to come study in the United States, and is making it dangerous for many of them to do so. And so many international students and scholars are already deciding that it's not safe to study in the United States. It's not safe to come and do research in the United States. They're deciding to go elsewhere. Instead of the steady brain gain that we have experienced for many decades, we are now experiencing a brain drain. And not only in relation to international students, but also with many U.S. American academics finding better research opportunities and also greater academic freedom outside of the United States. There's already an exodus happening of university professors, especially university professors who study totalitarianism, autocracy, and fascism, an exodus of those professors to leave the United States. This will make our country much less creative, much less innovative, and it will have lasting negative effects on the quality of life in our society. It is an evil and intolerable situation for international students or any students at our colleges and universities to be abducted, detained, and deported for using their right to think freely, speak freely, and act freely in ways that are doing no harm to others. But this is the situation that we currently face as American fascism attempts to assert its control over our colleges and universities, the students who attend them, and the faculty who teach and do research at them. In a tragic twist of history, Columbia University, the very university where one of the greatest champions of academic freedom taught for most of his career, that John Dewey that I mentioned before. He taught most of his career at Columbia University. That university has become the first university to capitulate to the ideological demands of our current regime. And American fascists would like the capitulation of Columbia University to those demands to be the first of many dominoes to fall. American fascists are already extorting other universities like Northwestern University and Cornell University, together something like $1.3 billion in withheld funding, unless they meet the ideological demands of the administration. Higher education leaders across the country must resist this. They must build a wall of resistance so that not one more domino will fall to the bullying of a fascist regime. In the end, it is better to lose funding than to become a puppet institution for fascism. We cannot allow the false identification of all criticisms of the Israeli government as being anti-Semitism. We can't allow the categorization of every criticism of Israel and Netanyahu as anti-Semitism to be a catalyst for fascist repression in the United States. Nor can we let it be used as an excuse for the killing of knowledge. It's a fancy word for that, epistemicide, the killing of knowledge. We are witnessing the killing of knowledge across various sectors of our society in the attempt to make the United States more white and more fundamentalist Christian again. It would be difficult enough for many colleges and universities to weather the storm that's coming, to weather the recession we most likely will experience in the very near future. If it were just a recession that colleges and universities had to deal with, which is most likely coming in the very near future, that would be difficult enough. But when you couple this with the current direct attacks on higher education, it is tragically the case that a significant number of our campuses will have difficulty surviving over the next few years. But our colleges and universities must not lose their souls simply for the sake of survival. But institutions of higher education cannot fend off these attacks on their academic freedom and their integrity alone. They will need the help of the public. So even though we haven't publicly supported these institutions with enough money for their operational budgets, we now need to publicly support them against these attacks on their academic freedom and their integrity. They need all those who believe in the importance of knowledge. They need all those who believe in the importance of wisdom to join in the resistance to keep our colleges and universities from becoming puppets controlled by the ideological strings of a deeply racist and fascist regime. And so I close by simply encouraging us all to join the ongoing efforts to keep their hands off our higher education for the sake of preserving a just and participatory democracy for us all.